In the 1700s, the British were running Jamaica. They imported slaves from Africa and made these slaves work on their sugar plantations for their profit. During this time, Britain had around 46,000 slave owners and about 12.5 million slaves.
Although the British had utmost authority, some of the slaves got away. The Maroons were a group of runaway slaves who, with the help of Grandy Nanny, moved to a remote location.
Grandy Nanny was born in 1686 in Ghana, Africa. Later in the 18th century, in Jamaica, she led the Maroons and resisted the British. The Maroons were a group of runaway slaves that created a community in exile and fought against the British for their freedom for many years.
Grandy Nanny was tragically killed by the British, which was a result from her fight against them. Her struggles led to triumph because the First World War ended with a peace treaty. There were allotted their own land and the slave trade was abolished.
The Maroons were a group of slaves that escaped from their British-owned plantations. They fled to the mountainous parts of Jamaica where it was difficult to find them. They formed independent communities as free men and women. According to Port City's Bristol, many of the Maroons fled to the mountainous areas of Jamaica where it was difficult for their owners to follow. Nanny and one of her brothers, Quao, founded the village in the Blue Mountains, which they later named Nannytown. She helped over 1,000 slaves to escape in her lifetime.
Grandy Nanny freed slaves and helped them to find refuge, a place where they could be safe, free, and given the opportunity to start over. Due to the loss of slaves who escaped, the British were losing work on their plantations, which meant they were losing money, and they couldn't let that happen. Grandy Nanny wouldn't return the slaves, so the British fought for them. The Maroons went to war with the British in 1724, Grandy Nanny was killed in 1733, and the war ended in 1739, but only because the British finally recognized the freedom of the Maroons and allotted them land.
After the First War ended on January 1st, 1808, the Abolition Bill was passed, which meant that all slave trade would come to an end in the British colonies. According to the Jamaica Info Service, on January 1st, 1808, the Abolition Bill was passed. Emancipation and apprenticeship came in 1834. Freedom was granted in 1838. This meant slaves were able to find work and declare their citizenship to finally be seen as somewhat of an equal. A complete freedom to the former slave was granted. This has direct correlation to Grandy Nanny because this is exactly what she fought for, similar to other situations in history. Grandy Nanny inspired this event. It could not happen without her.
Grandy Nanny's struggles led to triumph because the First Maroon War ended with the peace treaty. They were allotted their own land and the slave trade was abolished. Grandy Nanny was killed in the middle of the war, and in the end, her efforts were known and made history that inspired the abolition of slave trade in Jamaica. Grandy Nanny is important because despite the British's efforts to stop her and her army, she still went against their wishes to free the slaves, which ultimately resulted in her life. In today's society, Grandy Nanny and her efforts are still remembered. She was honored by the Jamaican government as a national hero and the Right Excellent. Her portrait is also displayed on the $500 note, which is the largest banknote in Jamaica. Grandy Nanny risked her life and went against the British to help others. Her efforts ultimately resulted in the inspiration of slavery abolition. We have taken it upon ourselves to educate the population about a woman who deserves her recognition for her contribution to the world.